Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Mortgage Minute. My name is Jeff Harrison, and we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So if we see some lips not syncing with words, that's all on the internet where I'm at. I'm traveling, so I apologize to Art and your guest, Art, for that issue. And we've got some things going on. We got a lot of stuff that we're going to cover. And we also have a little bit of a new format today. Art and I are going to have a discussion over some questions that have been coming in that we think we want to dive into a little bit, and let me pick at it and peel back layers and again get into the mind of the expert, and that's Art Alvarez. So without further ado, let's bring Art in and let's get the show started. Let me just find Art. There he is. Hey, Art, welcome.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Good, good. So I know you've got there's a lot of stuff going on here, and it's really strange because it's like that. Well, here's the good news or bad news. Which do you want first? So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of good stuff that you're going to tell us, but the reality is it may not be the best for everyone. But before I get out of here, I just want to let everybody know this is a live show. If you have questions or comments, I'm in the comment area, and if it's something that we can have Art answer on air, we'll do that. If you're watching this recorded, please put your questions in the comments, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, and Art will get back with you. Art, with that, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. I'm Art Alvarez with MortgageWorks, where we do have the answers and they're on the house. As you know, we like to start off by giving a little bit of an update on rates. And in that regard, I'll have to tell you that they're up a little bit, unfortunately. There's our rate grid that's posted on the homepage of our website. So that gives you some good indications of where current rates are, both for conforming conventional, FHA, VA, jumbo, even equity loans, HELOCs, and fixed rate seconds, what we call HE loans. So in terms of where these rates are at now, what's driving these rate levels? Well, of course, as you know, I always bring up the 10-year Treasury bond yield. That's your best benchmark to track where mortgage rates are headed. And as you can see there, the chart, the 5-day chart that Jeff posted here, actually, this is a 1-day chart, but still it gives you a good idea of the run up in the 10-year bond yield today, basically approaching nearly 4.5%. And you might be curious, we haven't seen that level on the 10-year Treasury bond yield in quite some time. In fact, guess what? We're now at the highest 10-year Treasury bond yield in about 16 years. It was last at this level right about this time in the fall of 2007. And of course, at that time, conforming mortgage rates were not far from where they're at now, right around the mid sixes. So, no coincidence there that with the 10-year yield at this level, the corresponding conforming mortgage rates are in that, mid sixes. Well, actually now we're pretty much into the high sixes and, fully now into the sevens. So what's going on this week to cause this run up in yields? Well, of course, the big item on this week's calendar was on Wednesday, September 20th. That's yesterday, which was the conclusion of the Fed meetings. The Fed met on Tuesday and Wednesday, and they concluded their meeting with their announcement that they're, of course, here I've got a question mark, no change to Fed funds rate. That's what was expected, and the Fed did confirm that they're holding steady on raising the Fed funds rate any further, at least as of this meeting. But I think what sent the bond yields higher was the post-meeting commentary, the press release, the press conference, where Chairman Powell did allude to the fact that there's probably going to be at least one more increase in the Fed funds rate this year in 2023. More importantly, though, he reiterated that rates are going to stay higher for longer. Well, what does that mean? Well, one of the things that came out of this meeting this week was there's a particular chart, they call it a dot plot chart, where they get all the folks who are involved in these Fed meetings. There's about 19 people in all, and they put essentially on a chart, dots to indicate where they see the Fed funds rate level being for the next 3 years, not just this year, but 2024, 2025, 2026. And that dot plot chart did spook the market somewhat and is part of the reason for these yields trending upwards, because Unfortunately, the majority of the participants were indicating that the Fed funds rate level, which is currently between 5.25 to 5.5, it's a 0.25% range. They're projecting that it's only going to be about 5% in 2024, about 4.5% in 2025, and not get down closer to the 4% level for the Fed funds rate until 2026. So it essentially suggests that Fed funds rate is going to remain elevated for potentially up to the next 3 years. So that's part of the reason you're seeing this big increase in the 10-year bond yield. And then today, you can see there are some of the economic data points that were released: initial claims for unemployment, Philly Fed manufacturing, as well as the U.S. leading economic indicators index. All of these were forecast to be slightly weaker, but the one that triggered the market today, initial claims for unemployment, forecast to be 220,000, came in at only 201,000. So that suggests the labor market continues to be strong. Less people filing for unemployment suggests the economy is running at a pretty good level. And of course, the backdrop to all this is oil prices. Oil prices are way up. Gas prices are way up. In fact, here we are in sunny Southern California. We're back to a $6 a gallon level for gas. Of course, that's a factor in terms of inflation. That's part of the reason why we're seeing inflation ticking back up when we thought we're seeing some improvement in the inflation rate. Gas prices certainly are counter to that and is not helping our inflation rate, as is the case with home prices, as we'll talk about later. And then tomorrow we've got the S&P Flash U.S. Services and U.S. Manufacturing PMI, that's Purchasing Manager Index. That is forecast to be slightly higher. If so, that's another sign of a strengthening economy. So there seems to be less talk about a recession coming, and I think that's part of why you're seeing the yields where they're at. So we'll see what plays out tomorrow, as well as going into next week. Hopefully we are hitting a resistance level, and we're not going to see too much further deterioration in the 10-year bond yield. We need to see that start coming back down. So that's your interest rate update. And now Jeff's going to come back on because we've got some questions that we want to talk about, questions that we received that Jeff wants to essentially put on the table so we can discuss with you.
Yeah, I think this is Art. Some things that I wasn't aware of was the fact that this Fed fund rate hadn't been, or excuse me, the 10-year Treasury had not been this high in 16 years. That's one of those things that you kind of at the moment not proud that we're breaking a record there, or a long-standing high. Is it?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit surprising. I've commented earlier. We seem to had found a support level of about a 4% yield on the 10-year. Then about 4.25 seemed to be kind of a support level where it was hovering at that yield for a couple of weeks at least. This is a pretty big jump. I mean, we're essentially going from about 4.25 to 4.5 in the space of about a week, and it's all about the Fed. I mean, the Fed was, while they did what was expected in terms of holding the Fed funds rate where it's at, their commentary was pretty strong about the fact that they're not done, and that they also see the Fed funds rate range, which is currently the 5.25 to 5.5. Most of the participants in the meeting are forecasting that's going to remain, somewhere between 4 and 5% over the next 2 to 3 years. So what that tells you is that the Fed's not planning on a rapid deceleration of the Fed funds rate, or a rapid decline. In other words, after a year and a half of increasing the Fed funds rate frequently and often, a 0.25%, even a couple of 0.5% increases, it's sounding like they're not predicting similar type moves to the downside, maybe not that numerous and not to that extent. It's going to be a pretty slow kind of a drip downward, which is why the markets, I think, are kind of relooking at where we're at and realizing that we're going to be at elevated rate levels for a while.
Well, it's interesting that I'm down here in the San Diego area for a bit, and driving around, I'm starting to notice home price or home, the for sale, the homes for sale are starting to have this unusual, which we have not seen in a long time, sticker on it. It says price reduced, and is this a function of the fact that the rates are as high as they are, and people are kind of now starting to, the supply and demand, and people thinking they're just going to wait it out? What is that all about? And I mean, is that one of those things that we're going to start seeing prices go down on homes to try to offset these higher interest rates?
Well, I think there's going to be some of that, but I would caution our viewers to not bet on that occurring to a great extent. No question that now, as I've been saying for a while now that, hey, don't listen to CNBC. Mortgages are not in the sevens. We can still do loans in the sixes. Even now, I have to admit, for us, we're pretty much hitting 7 on conforming conventional loans. And as a consequence, that is, I think, having some effect on home prices in some markets. But, some of the other data that came out today, now this is national data, but I think it underscores the overall environment, which is why I think our viewers should not bet on too much in the way of home price reductions. And that is, existing home sales came out today, about a little over 4 million. That was lower than expected. And it's historically a pretty low number compared to past years. The inventory of homes for sale is still at about a 3.3 month supply. It needs to get to 6 to be considered imbalance as far as the market goes. And then, in addition to that, between the fact that we've got mortgage rates are higher, we still have limited inventory. The other number that came out today that was released is the median home price. Again, this is a national number. But the median home price in the U.S. in the month of August increased, not decreased, increased 3.9%. So,
wow.
Now, though you may have driven around and seeing some price reduction signs on some of these listings, that could be real-time, real data that will start to show up in these statistics in the coming months, September, October, November. But when you consider that short supply, that is sort of a governing factor that even with higher rates, we're not seeing that big decrease in home values, simply because we continue to have too many buyers and not enough sellers. We still have a locked up market because there's too many homeowners who don't want to sell because they don't want to give up that low, first rate mortgage that they have now. So I think to the extent we're seeing some price reductions, it's a little bit more spotty. It's kind of market driven, particular individual isolated markets. But the overall trend is still home prices are remaining surprisingly firm despite these rate levels.
Well, for those people who are, I think as I was looking at something this morning that kind of really tied into this, I saw where there was somebody back in the desert. He sends me stuff almost every day about listings. And I did notice a couple on there. One was like $20,000 reduction. The other was 36. But I also noticed those particular homes' days on the market were longer. Do you think that's probably, the home seller was maybe betting on the farm as far as, hey, here's our highest possible price. And when they feel like it's not moving, that's when the prices came down, because they were kind of getting a little psychologically panicking, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to sell my house.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of, I think, the sort of the psychology of listing your home for sale. I talk to a lot of realtors. Of course, I do business with a lot of realtors, and it's pretty interesting that even in this current environment, when an agent gets a listing, it's quite often a case where there may be a little bit of a disagreement with the homeowner about what price to sell the home at. And there's still a lot of homeowners out there that, even though now they've decided to go ahead and sell, so you wonder what that's all about. Are they a homeowner with a 2.5% mortgage that's decided to bite the bullet and sell anyway because they need a bigger home or nicer home, or they need to move? We don't know. But the point is that seller oftentimes will still put that home on the market, listed at a price that maybe we're already elevated, but maybe is elevated even further. And they're betting on the fact that there's low inventory, there's lots of buyer demand. Maybe I'm going to get lucky and get a premium price. See, I think, that's sort of what we were seeing before. I mean, homes were flying off the MLS and selling in a week and selling for higher than list. there's not a lot of that going on. Again, that's more market specific. I've mentioned before, South Orange County, if you're a first time home buyer buying a condo for 60 to 800,000, you probably are going to see multiple offers and may go over list, but in other markets, that's not happening. So the point of all that is that, and see, that's an example too of where the homeowner and their agent, I think, should be more strategic about when they list their home, understanding the environment, understanding that mortgage rates are an obstacle to selling. And if you're thinking about trying to get a premium price on your listing, think about doing that in a different way. Maybe set it at a premium price, but immediately offer right from the get-go some financial help to the buyer in terms of a credit from that seller for closing costs, for more importantly, a buy down, a temporary 2-1, 3-1 buy down, so that homeowner can get, a first year rate at maybe 4%, well, now 4%, or first year rate maybe at 5%, and get a break on those mortgage payments and give them time to get into home ownership and then look to refi later. So, I think that is a better strategy, but we still see too much focus on let's just adjust the price up and down and not pull in the financing piece and use that as a way through the price to benefit the buyer and help spur that sale to a closing.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I think that is so important. You've mentioned in the past about using, seller compensation or seller help to buy that rate down. I'm just curious, what kind of if they were to see a price that reduced, or a home that reduced their price, how much of a price reduction would they actually have to see before they say, okay, that would offset the rate going to 7% when it was 5%? I mean, is it just too big of a jump, 2%?
Well, yeah. In fact, I was looking at this the other day, and let me give you some numbers just to kind of illustrate where I think you're going with that question. Let's say for right now, the median home price in Riverside County where we're at is $600,000. So let's assume you've got a typical 20% down transaction, loan amounts 480, at a 7% mortgage rate on a 30-year fixed for that $480,000 loan. The principal and interest payments just under $3,200 a month. So then you say, okay, how much would that home price of $600? How much would that have to drop in order for that same 80% loan to have a mortgage payment, even at the 7% rate, that would be consistent with a 1% lower rate, 6%. Well, guess what? That home price would have to be 10% lower.
Wow.
In other words, it would have to drop from 600 to 540, and then an 80% loan to 540 at 7% would get you a principal and interest payment that would be equivalent to the 6% that we had, 2 months ago. So that tells you how much you'd have to wait for the property value to fall to get that comparable 6% payment. And then it gets worse. If you're looking at, how much does that home price have to fall from 600 to get a payment at current rates that would be equivalent to a 5% rate? Well, guess what? In that case, the home price has to fall by 19%.
Wow.
If you want to get a mortgage payment today off of that $600,000 home list price and have the payment at today's rate equivalent to, a 4% rate, that $600,000 home would have to have a price reduction of 28%.
Wow.
Down to like $430,000. The point of all that is for those who are waiting, thinking, okay, I'm going to wait for home prices to fall. Even if you assume the worst case that rates aren't going to get any better, those kind of reductions in home prices, I don't see that happening. I mean, the current conditions don't support those kinds of doomsday drop in home values. We're just not seeing it. Again, we're in this odd market. We're a locked up market where not enough inventory. There's lots of buyers, high rates, and that has, surprisingly to some people, kept prices up. And then the problem is, again, these high rate levels aren't going to last forever. They will come down eventually. Now, it sounds like it might be longer than we thought. It may not be next, 6 to 18 months. It could be 24 to 36 months. but they will adjust back downward. And so to that extent, if you're waiting for home prices to fall substantially, I don't think that's in the cards. I think that's a bad play. If you're waiting for rates to fall, you may have to wait longer. And I would argue lower rates are going to bring out even more of that buyer demand that is going to prevent those home prices from falling when more of those sellers, those homeowners, go ahead and put their home on the market. Because again, if we have a 3-month supply now and it needs to get to 6 to have a balanced market, that means we can have a heck of a lot of homes added to the market by those sellers that if they wait and do that when rates are falling, the lower rates are going to bring in so much buyer demand. I think it's going to be a bit of a wash, and home prices are going to remain pretty stable, if not rise further. So I still think, playing the waiting game and trying to time when to buy, if you're still thinking you want to buy, I think that's hazardous. And I think you're better off trying to strategically take advantage of the current conditions, use the financing piece as part of making an offer, get into home ownership now so you can enjoy that increase in home values when rates do fall. And then when those rates do fall, you then have the opportunity to do that refi. So I think that's a better approach. And I think hopefully more and more home buyers and home sellers start thinking that way. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a game of Russian roulette if they're waiting. And it just reminds me of all the headlines that you've spoken about over the months. It sounds like Barbara Corcoran may be the most potentially accurate, where she said, hey, the prices are just going to go through the roof because of the conditions you've talked about. I mean, I'll end with this and I'll turn the program back over to you. Is in your years in the mortgage industry, over 4 decades, have you ever seen these conditions? This almost reminds me of that movie, The Perfect Storm, where the inventories are low, the demand is high, and the rates are where that. Have you ever seen that condition?
No, and in fact, that's a very good question, and it underscores how unusual essentially the last 3 years have been in the mortgage industry. And what I mean by that is, and what's different now versus prior cycles in the 4 decades, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and all those that I've been involved in, is the current rate levels, or the rate levels that current homeowners have, by and large. A vast majority of current homeowners have very low mortgage rates that are unprecedented in the history of the country. 2020 and 2021 were the lowest mortgage rates in the history of the country. Never seen prior to that. I don't think in our lifetime we're going to see it again. It was a special period of time, special in a bad way because of the pandemic, but that of course led to the government deciding they had to inject a huge amount of money into the economy to prop things up. And it created those very, very low mortgage rates. And so I've never seen the stock of homeowners in the country with that many, majority of them having such low existing rates. I've never seen that before. And that's a fundamental factor in the current market lockup. That's what's keeping the inventory low when you would think it would be higher, given how strong the economy is overall. There's still a lot of money out there. I think the talk of recession has cooled. The economy does seem to be pretty strong. And I think in a more normal circumstance where you didn't have, 50% of the homeowners out there with 2.5% mortgages, a lot more of those homes would be on the market because the homeowner's doing well financially. They've got good income. They want a bigger, better house. They want to list it and they want to move up. That segment of the market, that part of the process is pretty rare at the moment, and something I've never seen in over four decades. I haven't seen it.
Wow. Well, I guess we just have to be aggressive if we're a home buyer and get out there and realize, hey, we're going to know that based on what you said with those 19 points that we are going to see the rates start to come back the other direction, and to take advantage of the prices where they're at now, because I don't see a 19 or what was the other 20? 4%?
10% reduction, 19%, 28%. I don't see those kinds of drops in home prices.
Not with the economy as strong as it is. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Well,
would
Art,
need to have some sort of economic shock, like the 2008, where we had too many homeowners that didn't really qualify for their mortgages, and we had the huge default increase and a bunch of foreclosures. None of that is occurring right now. And that without that, I don't see home prices falling in a substantial way anytime soon.
well, Art, thank you for taking the time and really diving deep into this question. I think it's something that's on the mind of many people out there, whether they're home buyers or home sellers or people thinking about buying a home. This probably helped them a lot. So I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for that segment. Thanks for listening to that. I want to go into last week's closing question. And here it is. Can rent received from boarders be used as qualifying income? And of course, a boarder is someone who essentially rents a room from the homeowner. And I actually get this question fairly often, surprisingly. And the answer is yes, but subject to conditions. So it's a yes, but kind of an answer. And I've laid out for you some guidelines for different loan types. For example, FHA. FHA does allow you to use boarder income as part of your qualifying income if you're a homeowner, like, for example, if you're refinancing. However, in order for FHA to use that boarder income, you have to demonstrate a 2-year history of receiving that boarder income, and you would verify that through providing your tax returns. And that that homeowner has to still be receiving the boarder income, the boarder rent from that boarder. So now, obviously, the issue there is you wonder how many folks who are renting out a room, do they actually have a formal rental agreement? And do they actually report that income on their tax return at the end of the year? I would suggest to you that is pretty rare. So when I get this question and I do provide the answer that it's possible, I would have to admit that in most cases, the person asking will then admit that they're not reporting that income on their tax return, which of course prevents it from being used. Fannie Mae actually allows rent from a live-in caregiver for disabled borrowers. And that rent that's being received by the homeowners, ultimately the origin of that is Medicaid waiver funds that are included in the room and board that the live-in caregiver is provided. So that's how the homeowner would receive that rental income, and that can be used as boarder income for qualifying, for example, if you're doing a refi. Now, Fannie Mae does have a specific program called a Home Ready program. Now, this program is designed for low to moderate income borrowers. There is an income limitation to be eligible for the program. For example, in Riverside County, the family median income has to be $94,000. About $94,000 a year max, and the border occupant does not, or it should not be on the mortgage or on home title, and does have to have lived in the home for the last 12 months. The homeowner does have to document history of shared residency, so you have to prove that the boarders lived in the same property for that 12-month period. You do have to document the history of rental payments being received, but they don't have to be on tax returns. So that's interesting. You don't have to show that you reported that income on a tax return. And then again, as I mentioned before, the Home Ready program does have an area median income limit. And so as a consequence, in order to take advantage of these guidelines to use boarder income for qualifying, you do have to have annual income that doesn't exceed a certain limit. Again, in Riverside County, it's about $94,000. So that's a good question. The boarder income can be used, although the conditions are such that in reality, we don't see it used that often, most of the time because the homeowner doesn't report the income on their tax return for FHA, or they don't meet the criteria for a Home Ready program because their income is too high. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move into the closing question for next week. It's kind of an interesting one. Here it is. May non-taxable income be grossed up for mortgage qualifying purposes? Again, may non-taxable income be grossed up for mortgage qualifying purposes? So ponder that question, give it some thought, and next week I'll give you the answer, and it'll be on the house. Jeff, back to you.
That's a tough question. Grossed up. I think we have to figure out what grossed up means before we can answer that question. I'm looking forward to the answer. Art, I want to say thank you for taking the time to go through that question in depth. These are some questions that are submitted, and they have more timely relevance to the viewers, and they really would like to know those answers. So thank you very much for doing that.
Sure.
All right. So once again, those that are watching this live, please put your questions in the comments. If you're watching it in a rerun on YouTube or Facebook, please just put your comments in the comment section, or you can just contact Art at 760-883-5700. That's his office number. But if it's urgent, we found out that even he might have gotten a waterproof container for his flip phone when he's swimming. And you can contact him on his cell phone at 714-612-9035. And of course, you can get him on it. You can look at the website as we showed earlier, and that's the rate grid. And you update that weekly. Is that the?
Oh, just about every day.
Every day, so it's up to date, and there's a lot of great tools on there. You've got some great calculators in there. Figure out, you talked about it last week, but I want to mention, because that is a phenomenal resource. And of course, you can always reach out to Art via email at art@mwloan.com. Art, any last thoughts before we let you go today?
Yeah, a couple things actually. On the Q&A we just did a minute ago, you mentioned driving around and seeing price reduction signs, down $20,000. That's a good example, as I mentioned before, about, that's a seller who, in my mind, could have been more strategic. You could take that $20,000 price reduction and instead, talk to somebody like us, and we could tell that seller, that homeowner, how that $20,000 could be used to buy down the prospective buyer's interest rate. Going back to that previous example we were talking about, to get the rate equivalent payment for a price reduction in the home. For $20,000, you can nearly do a 3-2-1 buy down and take that initial rate from 7% the first year to 4% the first year on that $600,000 price level example that we were using. That would save the buyer over $900 a month in their payment the first year. In my mind, that's a more powerful message to give to that prospective buyer in terms of a concession from the seller. Don't just take that $20,000 off the price. That's only worth about $120 a month. Take that $20,000, put it to a buy down, save that buyer over $900 a month. That's a winning formula to get the home sold. So that's one point I'd make. And the other two things, in terms of interest rates, where they're at now, and everyone, I'm sure, disappointed to see they are climbing further. Two things. One is FHA is a great option. We're still in the mid sixes for FHA. And I always urge people who are looking at buying a home at these rates, and if you're putting less than 20% down, 10%, even 15%, don't forget about FHA as an option, even if you have high credit scores. FHA, with their lower annual mortgage insurance premium and the fact you can still get a 30-year fix in the mid sixes, is a great option for somebody who otherwise might be steered toward a conforming conventional loan. And then lastly, we've got some good jumbo product. Now, these are hybrid arms fixed for 5 years or 7 years, where you can still get an interest rate below 7 fixed for that 5 or 7 year period, right in the range of 6.75 to 6 7/8. Loan amounts up to $4 million, and the rate's the same whether it's a primary home or a second home. So those two items, the FHAs and those jumbo hybrid arms, we've got some options where you can still get rates in the sixes. So keep that in mind.
Wow, time to get off the fence and make it happen. And I love that example of the buy down. It almost makes me think from a mind of a salesperson. Like, I would go through the MLS and say, who's reduced their prices? Let me call that agent and say, hey, have you thought of this? I can help you put together a program for you. Right. Is that even legal? Can you do things like that?
Well, you can. Of course, the key is have that conversation before the listing agent and their seller have lowered the price on the listing. So the key is have that conversation with the seller who's been on the market for more than 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and they're contemplating a price reduction. That's when you should have that conversation about, well, let's not just whack off $30,000 from the price. Can we use that money more efficiently and more for the benefit of the buyer, so that you end up with a win-win? You get the home sold.
Yeah, let's face it. If you offered free dessert the chances are you get more people coming in for dinner. It seems like doing it the way you just discussed is like standing out from everybody else that just sells dinner. You sell dinner and you give a free dessert. And I think that people will beat the door down to come to you. So I think that's a great idea. Art, as always, you are a wealth. I should say you're a plethora of information, and it's always great to talk to you every week and find out what's going on in the mortgage business. Please make sure, if you're listening to this, reach out to Art, call him at the office, 760-883-5700. And of course, you can get on his cell phone at 714-612-9035. Check out the website for the calculators, as well as the rates, which are updated daily, basically. And then, of course, you can email Art at mwloan.com. Art, just a reminder, those people that are watching it afterwards, they'll be putting their comments and questions in the YouTube or Facebook chat, and Art will get back to you on those. Other than that, Art, I'm going to turn this over to you, and have a great week.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. You too. See you next week. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching and listening. Stay tuned next week for another edition to Mortgage Minute. I'm Art Alvarez at MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. So long. Take care.